speaker today, who has been dedicated to sustainability and environmental justice for over 20 years through her work as a landscape architect and educator. She joined the University of Toronto Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design in 2018 and has also served as the Associate Dean of Research and Director of the Master of Landscape Architecture program, for which she received the 2024 Council of Educators in Landscape Architecture Outstanding Administrator Award. Long title. Liat Margolis founded the GRIT Lab, which is the Green Roof Innovation Testing Laboratory, an internationally renowned research facility at U of T dedicated to research and training on living green infrastructure. The lab includes 2 rooftop facilities with over 6,000 square feet of experimental green roofs, equipped with hundreds of sensors that collect data in real time. She's an advocate of interdisciplinary and hands-on research and education with long-standing collaborations with biology, forestry, and civil engineering researchers, as well as industry, government, and institutional partners. For establishing this unique initiative, she received the 2013 American Association of Landscape Architects Excellence Award in Research. So Liat has also served on environmental or advisory committees for the City of Toronto, including the Green Streets Technical Guidelines Pollinator Protection Strategy. I'm sorry, these are really long titles. And she's collaborated with over 80 researchers across Canada as a member of the Sustainable Canada Dialogues, an initiative on climate change policy solutions and transitions to a low carbon energy future. So you don't want to hear me. So with that, I'll cut off the last little bit of all of her awards and accolades and ask you to please welcome Liat Margolis to speak to us today on a call to action number 66, a land-based Indigenous youth program. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pat, for the lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me here and to share my work with you today. My name is Liat Margolis, and I'm of Jewish Israeli heritage. 17 years ago, I settled in this territory of the Anishinaabe, Michisapequa, the Wendat, and the Haudenosaunee peoples when I received a tenure track position in the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape, and Design. For the past 8 years, I've had the honor of collaborating with Elder Wabigoon, whose birth home is Laksul First Nation, to build an Indigenous youth program. This has allowed me to reflect on the role of institutional leadership on truth and reconciliation. I want to dedicate my talk today to the youth, from whom I've learned so much and who have become a significant part of my personal life. A special thanks to Kaya Grant, one of the Nikibii Dawadinna Giigwag youth who joins me here today. Before I proceed, I want to offer a content warning. Some of the information I will speak about may be emotionally challenging, especially to people who have experienced the impacts of the Indian Act and residential schools. My talk today is titled Truth and Reconciliation, Call to Action number 66. The call states the following. We call upon the federal government to establish multi-year funding for community-based youth organizations to deliver programs on reconciliation and establish a national network to share information and best practices. According to a recent report by the organization Indigenous Watchdog, the current progress status for the past decade is incomplete. At present, the official federal government response deleted all references to the Indigenous Youth Council and their mandate. In response to call number 66, Nikibii Dawadinna Giigwag was launched in 2018 and is an elder-led land-based program for Indigenous youth that provides full-time summer employment and mentorship to post-secondary education in environmental sustainability fields. These include Indigenous environmental studies, landscape architecture, ecological restoration, urban forestry, and food studies. Each summer, 10 high school youth ages 15 to 20 are employed full-time at the Daniels faculty to engage in the research and design of medicine gardens, urban agriculture, campus landscapes, restoration of disturbed sites, seed keeping, food forests, foraging, and cooking. These practices connect youth to elders, knowledge keepers, healers, architects, researchers, ecologists, gardeners, chefs, and artists, strengthening the youth's cultural identity and connection to land. This talk is a self-reflection on my role within the University of Toronto in my capacity as a tenure-track faculty member and the privileges that this position affords. I will focus on my perspective and role as a non-Indigenous lead and collaborator in this work. I will also reflect on the role of non-Indigenous partners and the ways in which they have enabled a sustained response to truth and reconciliation. Now, before I go any further, I want to provide some context for this work a decade after the TRC report and calls to action were adopted by the federal government. At present, it is widely criticized that one, Canadians rush to reconciliation before learning and embracing the truth of the ongoing issues stemming from settler colonialism generally and residential schools specifically. On the left, an article by Indigenous scholars Daniel Heath Justice and Sean Carlton about the residential school denialism 2 months after the discovery of the unmarked graves in Kamloops residential schools. Two, there have been very little progress on the calls to action. And in the middle, a page from the Yellowhead Institute 2023 report by scholars Ava Jewell and Ian Mosby on TRC progress or lack thereof, with only 13 out of 94 calls to action completed and 0 actions in 2023 and 24. And three, a fundamental contradiction exists in pursuing reconciliation so long as settler colonialism, colonial doctrines, power structures, and policies are still in place. Last week, I was watching the CBC series, The Knowing, which is based on Anishinaabe journalist and author Tanya Talaga's eponymous book. One of the episodes draws our attention to the historic moment on July 25th, 2022, when the late Pope Francis pronounced his apology to residential school survivors in Musqueam, Alberta, on the site of the Armanascan residential school, and expressed his, quote, shame and sorrow for the Catholic Church's role in abuses and the lack of respect shown to Indigenous cultures and their values, end quote. 7 years after the Truth and Reconciliation report, and only due to the continuous persistence of Indigenous peoples, did the Pope agree to apologize. This long-awaited apology failed to answer call number 58, as the Pope apologized for the actions of individuals within the Church, not the actions of the Catholic Church as an institution. There is no doubt that the horrific news of the findings of the 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops Indian residential schools jolted Canadians and the world to finally acknowledge what survivors and family members have been testifying for decades. In The Knowing, Tanya Talaga reminds viewers that children in residential schools were referred to by their registration numbers. Therefore, the elders insisted that they are not referred to as 215, yet another dehumanizing number, but instead they would be referred to as Lesquikwe, the missing. A banner including the known names of 4,120 children who died while in the so-called care of the Indian residential schools were held up during the apology, imploring the Pope for the Catholic Church to release records of deaths and burials. Currently, 10,028 unmarked graves have been found in only of the 11 school grounds that have been searched. There are still 128 schools that need to be searched. Another powerful photo from that day is the juxtaposition of the Pope with the former AFN chief Phil Fontaine, who courageously went on national news in an interview with Barbara Frum in 1990 to share with the Canadian public his personal experience of abuse in residential school. This was a pivotal moment around which the report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People were conducting extensive public hearings, gathering testimonies from survivors, and ultimately provided detailed findings and 440 recommendations. The report was said to have died on arrival in Parliament due to the costs associated with redressing the historical and ongoing violence towards Indigenous peoples in Canada. 25 plus years later, in 2006, the Indian Residential School Settlement Agreement was signed and stands to be the largest class action settlement in Canadian history, signed between the government and approximately 86,000 survivors, with a financial compensation of $1.9 billion. Other settlements have since followed for the day school survivors, 60 scoop survivors, and present-day abuses by the so-called child welfare system. The bottom line is that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission wasn't conducted voluntarily by the government or by public demand, but rather because of decades of persistent fighting by Indigenous people through the courts and in the public eye. In March 2023, the Vatican and Pope Francis formally repudiated the doctrine of discovery, a 15th century concept from papal decrees that justify the colonial powers of seizure of Indigenous lands and the subjugation of Indigenous peoples. While an important pronouncement, the action has no legal teeth. And to date, the Canadian government has failed to answer call number 47, which asks federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to repudiate concepts like the doctrine of discovery and terra nullius that justify Crown sovereignty over Indigenous peoples and lands, and to reform laws and policies that continue to rely on them. One of the failings that I see currently with the work that I do surrounding truth and reconciliation within the academic institution, in education more broadly, in the fields of architecture and landscape, urban design, and by extension in build projects around Toronto, is the lack of historical knowledge and recognition of the inherent rights and treaty rights of Indigenous peoples. And so when doing the work that I do, I always keep in mind that Indigenous peoples are not marginalized or racialized people. They're not cultural groups within the Canadian body politic. Indigenous peoples have inherent rights and self-determination and self-government. They also have treaty rights and or modern-day agreements to which the Crown is obligated by law. Indigenous peoples are not stakeholders. Neither are they equity, diversity, or inclusion seeking. They're seeking the recognition of their rights and the Crown obligations upheld. These recognized rights, as affirmed by the Constitution and UNDRIP, are continuously violated, while racist assimilative policies such as the Indian Act are still very much in place today. 2 years ago, I developed a new course for the Daniels faculty titled Land Relations, Truth and Reconciliation, which is, to my knowledge, the first and only course that is entirely dedicated to teaching a decolonial Canadian history in our undergraduate program. It is an introductory course to Indigenous settler relations, political history, and contemporary issues in Canada, highlighting issues facing Indigenous peoples today, as well as Indigenous resistance and calls to justice. The images here showcase a semester-long assignment which invites each student to explore a decolonial mapping, a methodology to understand the TRC report and calls to action within a long arc of histories of land, relations, policies, and ongoing impacts on Indigenous peoples from pre-contact to present day. And in a class of about 60 to 80 students, we have a remapping of Canada with all these different territories put together. In this slide are two mappings from a course I've been teaching for the last 8 years in the Master of Landscape Architecture studio called Landscape and Memory, which explore the U of T TRC calls to action for Indigenous spaces on campus. In this mapping, we try to understand our land acknowledgement. Can we begin to unpack the complexity of the phrase called traditional territory of the Mississauga people or the Anishinaabe people? As an example, on the left is a mapping of the extent of wild rice cultivation throughout southern Ontario prior to the 1923 Williams Treaties, which criminalized harvesting, fishing, hunting, etc., until 2018. These waterways are home of the sacred berry for the Anishinaabe people, were severed by the Trent Severn Waterway with 56 locks. The map also overlays boil water advisories in First Nations today, and by contrast, cultural resurgence of wild rice in the First Nation. On the right, the extent to which the oak and pine savanna covered the GTA, compared to what is left today due to the bans on control burn practices and urbanization, making this ecology one of the rarest in the world. Once again, through community resilience and persistence, control burn is now practiced annually by the City of Toronto with the guidance of Indigenous protocols. And in a new undergraduate course that started last year, titled Water's Life, Environmental Racism, and Indigenous Water Protectors, students use ArcGIS Story Map online tool to generate a visual examination of settler colonial policies in Canada that continue to produce a crisis of water contamination in First Nations, contrasted by Indigenous resistance and assertion of rights, traditional government, and ethical responsibility for the protection of land and water. Residential schools are referred to as, quote, a dark chapter in Canadian history, end quote. But the reality is that the racist policies and actions persist. First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities are disproportionately impacted by poverty, disease, gender violence, suicide, environmental contamination, lack of access to education, and ongoing apprehension of children. Children are severely in the foster care system, with an average of 54% across Canada and as high as 90% in Manitoba. The strongest voices on rights, land, and water protection, climate change, and cultural reclamations are led by Indigenous youth, as they have no choice. So many of the youth we work with live with the ongoing impacts of generational trauma and displacement. And it has been one of our program's motivations to give a platform to the youth's voices and leadership to help clear the path for them, to lead us into a better future, and to give them a safe space where they can feel only love, support, respect, and appreciation for their gifts and dreams. At the core of Settler Colonial Project is the undeniable link between the historical and ongoing violence against Indigenous people and violence against the earth through values of land ownership and resource extraction. And so the name of our program, Nikibii, Dawadinna, Giigwag, is Anishinaabemowin for Flooded Valley Healing. The youth gifted the name to the program in the very first year. And their vision was for the healing of the land and the water and a healing of themselves. The National TRC calls to action number 62 to 65, call upon the education sector to provide training for educators on how to integrate Indigenous history, knowledge systems into curriculum, as well as provide the resources for teaching, staffing, research, and community partnerships. U of T
like many post-secondary institutions, struck its own process to self-reflect on its history, place, local community, and capacity, and adopted the 34 calls to action in 2017. A recent Inspire report seen on the right calls for all TRC calls to action to be considered in tandem when working toward a long-lasting strategy plan. As such, one cannot design spaces for Indigenous cultural teachings, research, and community without an institutional shift in values and practices. One cannot draw students to colonial institutions without staffing with Indigenous faculty and providing the support needed for students through elders and community partnerships. One cannot sustain students and faculty at the university without a commitment from leadership across all academic divisions and institutional operations to learn and understand the historical and ongoing truth. So while the Nikibii Dawadinna Giigwag program addresses call number 26, which focuses on pathways to post-secondary education, and in our case, into fields that are related to design and the environment, our work has been inseparable from call number 1, Indigenous spaces, call number 16, the role of Indigenous elders and knowledge providers, call number 17, decolonial curriculum, and call number 30, mentorship for Indigenous youth post-high school. Our initial motivation for the program was to respond to the low rates of high school graduation and critical underrepresentation in post-secondary education and in the fields that are related to design and the environment. Indigenous people make up 0.001% of registered architects and landscape architects in Canada. Whereas Indigenous communities across Canada are at the forefront of environmental protection, their voices are greatly needed in architecture, landscape, urban planning, forestry, ecology, and so on. 2 years ago, we established a partnership with the Toronto District School Board, Urban Indigenous Education Centre, to designate our program as a co-op placement, which earns participant students 1 high school credit towards graduation. In this photo, on the left, Serenity Pazandawatch, and on the right, Kaya Grant, present their research and proposal for the marker trees to Waterfront Toronto and our collaborators. Each year, we hire, with grant funding we receive at the Daniels faculty, 10 Toronto-based youth, ages 15 to 20. The youth are hired in the role of research assistants in landscape architecture and Indigenous placekeeping. And with the guidance from NDG program leads and a circle of mentors, they work on real landscape design projects that we co-develop with partnering organizations. Our program was set up as a 6-week intensive summer employment program with part-time employment in the fall and spring. This addresses the historical and ongoing impacts of the Indian Act, which has contributed to the highest poverty rates for Indigenous peoples compared to all Canadians, and where youth are contributing to their families' income, or at times are in the child foster care system with no family members to support them financially or otherwise. This may be their first job, and their employment with U of T then positions them well to gain further meaningful employment. In this photo, Waterfront Toronto, along with our long-standing mentors, Turo Architect and Trophic Design, are introducing the hydrological and ecological work undertaken over 15 years at the Bidasagay Park to transform the industrial wasteland into a place that is now teeming with life. Our primary principle is that the program is elder-led and culturally grounded. Elder Wabagoon and I are the co-leads of the NDG program, and together we discuss and evolve our values and actions, our interdisciplinary curriculum, our partnerships, and how to approach new directions and opportunities, and likewise, difficult situations where we may need to reevaluate our position. A critical point I wish to make concerns how we value the role of elders as educators and leaders in decolonial cultural and land-based work, and to reconsider the impacts of our current practices, which leaves elders and knowledge keepers compensated only through honorariums. This image was taken at an ecological restoration site along the Highland Creek at the UTSC, the Scarborough campus, where we've had a close partnership for the past 4 years. In the foreground are a few of 300 saplings that we had just planted with 70 community volunteers as part of ongoing work we've been doing with the City of Toronto Urban Forestry to increase the canopy of native trees and shrubs in Toronto. NDG plants close to 1,000 trees and shrubs each year with several partnering organizations. This photo is a still from a 2025 documentary film titled Urban Forests, A Lifeline, which is now distributed through the National Film Board. Our curriculum is rooted in community partnerships where youth get to work on actual design and ecological restoration projects and build relations with the land and local stewards over multiple years. Through this engaged and embodied model, all of us learn from the land what it was, what it wants to be, and how to weave the needs of all of creation with curricular and community building aspirations and with ongoing stewardship. In this photo, Jordi Boygaran is holding a yarrow plant whose gift, among many others, is that it can stop bleeding immediately. Along with 20 other native species, we planted 400 ground cover plants to help complete the gathering circle garden for the new Indigenous house at UTSC, which can be seen in the back. Pictured here is a part of a 12-foot long drawing of a 13-moon calendar, which includes our research for the gathering circle, showing what plant gifts are in peak in each moon and what relations are important at that time, providing a curricular opportunity for Indigenous House to invite elders, language speakers, gardeners, artists, etc., to share land-based teachings through Indigenous leadership and values of relationality. Potawatomi botany scholar Robin Wall-Kimmerer says, quote, "As a nation, we suffer from plant blindness. People think they're living in green wallpaper without understanding the integrity and brilliance of all the green lives around them. But when you live in a city, or even if you live in the country, but are glued to your phone the whole time, how are you going to know? So engagement with the living world through food, through recreation, through education is essential," end quote. So a core component of our program is rooted in building relations with the plant nation. This is a photo of sweet fern, anise hyssop, white pine, sumac, raspberry leaf, chicory and goldenrod, and others we foraged on one of our many walks in the Highland Creek Ravine on the UTSC campus, where we have been foraging for the past 4 years and working in collaboration with the UTSC Culinaria Research Institute Research Kitchen. One of the NDG youth alumni, Ella Laforme, wisely said, quote, "In the city, consistent access to land where Indigenous people can practice land-based teachings and ceremonies is extremely limited. Being on the land is integral to identity, belonging, language, spirituality, and protocols. Many of us have been disconnected from our land. But through NDG, we realize that land is always with us. Our plant kin are always around us, and we're not alone if we know their names. Knowing plants and their communities means that we're connected to the region, and even if we're houseless, we feel at home," unquote. On the left is Ella getting to know sumac. In the middle, discovering a puffball mushroom, which we later sauteed in butter. One of her favorite creations, stinging nettle cake, which tastes like matcha, with a lemon glaze and decorated with foraged wild violet flowers. Each project begins with a place, an embedded learning from the land. In this case, botanical drawings, the youth do to consider the plant specialist relations as a host to specific insects, alongside an understanding of the plant's medicinal gifts and traditional uses by First Nations, reconnected them with ancestral knowledges and practices. Learning from the land means revisiting sites again and again and again to witness the cycles and transformation of plants and their relatives. In this image, the pages of a leaf press we worked on for an entire summer during our research for the UTSC Indigenous House Gathering Circle. And in the foreground, the leaves of Desmodium canadense, which provides the leafcutter bee round antiseptic blankets for their brood nests. This photo showcases a part of a small exhibition we put together for the UTSC library, which told the story of our collaboration, our collaborative work with the UTSC Farm and Seed Library on seed keeping practices through botanical beating. An invitation for the UTSC community to be in reciprocity with the seeds, plants, and land that sustains us. Our research also entails travel to Indigenous-led ecological restoration initiatives to learn about the restoration of plant communities, but also of land management knowledge systems that were criminalized for nearly 100 years. In this photo, the Alderville First Nation restoration of a black oak savanna through control burn practices and seed keeping. NDG has cultivated a partnership with the Culinaria Research Center at the UTSC grounds, UTSC, as well as ground supervisor Mark Nielsen, in hosting monthly foraging sessions to ethically gather fruit, nuts, roots, herbs, and fungi. The foraged gifts are brought back to Culinaria, where kitchen coordinator Kelsey Kilgore and various collaborators help the youth execute dishes with a collaborative vision. This past summer, Haudenosaunee chef Taylor Parker shared moose meat his cousin hunted, and taught us to cold smoke the meat with cedar and birch bark we foraged through together in the valley. So within the context of the university, this methodology challenges standardized learning, breaks through traditional silos to cultivate relations across disciplinary fields, includes voices that are traditionally not recognized within the academy, such as grounds operators, and brings in the lived experience of community foragers, as well as the wisdom of Indigenous knowledge providers, most often relegated outside of the academy, to weave together a community in pursuit of Indigenous values-centered learning. Most importantly, when the youth learn the land and through their own discoveries and creativity, healing emerges and a return to oneself begins. When the youth learning occurs in the presence of and surrounded by the support of their community through a web of relations, they revive, they thrive. Their voices become clear and confident when they know that their discoveries contribute to the program's co-creations and that they are valued for their shine, for their brilliance. When we ask the youth to describe NDG, they say, "My second family." This photo documents a planting ceremony at New College where NDG youth planted a white pine in collaboration with the New College community. This has been one of several planting projects in the courtyard, which gave NDG youth an opportunity to study, design, plant, observe, draw, remove invasives, and develop a sense of belonging and connection with the place and the community. This is an area which featured here in the photo that up until 4 years ago was planted with lawn and now hosts our food forest with over 60 native shade-loving trees and shrubs and over 1,000 ground covers, including 30 plus different woodland species. Featured in this photo on the left are Kamar Flores Perkins and Alicia McMullen drawing ground cover plants. Such botanical drawings were then converted to laser etched clipboards for the field drawings as seen in the middle image. And on the right are two 2025 graduate student mentors, Catherine Gorelick and Simona Lipa, foraging serviceberry here in New College to prepare delicious treats to welcome the youth on their first day. The curriculum is ever evolving and changes based on place, its transformation, and the creative idea that all the participants, youth, mentors, project partners, generate based on their own capacity and talents. The white pine has since been dubbed the NDG tree. Elder Wabigoon and the youth return to the place regularly for ceremony, for reflection, to offer sacred asema. What matters to the youth and the elders are the personal connections and stories they will be able to share with their family and future generations about the places they helped co-create, an alternative perspective to the institutional design process of Indigenous spaces on campus. Importantly, none of the land-based projects NDG has been stewarding across the U of T campuses and with other Toronto-based organizations would have been possible without the continued support of individuals who do what they do not because it is in their job description or because they look to receive credit or awards. Stan Swagel, head of grounds at UT St. George, Ron Vanderkratz, CAO of New College, and former principal of New College, Bonnie McElhaney, are three of many dedicated and generous partners who have continued to leverage their positions, resources, and energy to sustain these relations. In creating new paradigms, models of deep engagement were generated, where participants generously share resources and, most importantly, joy. Many of these partners share with our group that the moments that they spend with the youth and the years of engagement with in the NDG program have been one of their highlights of their careers. Several ethical questions I continue to ask myself as I continue my journey of learning, co-creating to the TRC. Is there a meaningful benefit to the Indigenous individuals and communities I work with? Do I stand to gain more than my partners? Does this program maintain a true co-leadership? Are we listening to the youth? Does this work lead to institutional change? Are the partners intent, honest, and not extractive? How do we navigate around embedded racism, ignorance, and self-serving actions that perpetuate harm, including lateral violence? How do we build a sense of love, respect, care, and generosity? How do we develop meaningful relations with the land and stewards? And could NDG youth alumni lead the program in the future? A couple of recent projects that have had a meaningful impact. The first is a partnership with the Hart House Farm, a 150-acre site located on the Niagara Escarpment along the Credit River in the Caledon Hills, which Hart House purchased in 1949 for recreational purposes for U of T students. Logging for farming started in the 1820s. And so this land has been deeply disturbed. And while a forest cover has reestablished since the 50s, a significant percentage of non-native invasive species have taken over. The NDG program brought together the Credit Valley Conservation Authority, the Bruce Trail Conservancy Ecological Team, and dozens of volunteers to launch an annual day for the removal of the highly invasive European buckthorn. Given that Hart House's farm mandate is to support student life and lacks the capacity for forest management, our goal is to co-develop a model for community engaged invasive species management and forest restoration. In addition, one of our ethical principles at NDG is that we also honor all of creation. Therefore, we make use of invasives. We forage and cook with invasives. We build, we make dyes, and weave invasives. And so with the dried buckthorn branches, we have been building what is called a dead hedge, or maybe you want to call it a living hedge, because it's essentially a thick fence that serves as a habitat for all sorts of four-legged crawlers and flyers, as well as a windbreak for teepee. Here we had the honor of working with Faithkeeper Clay Shirt, who supports the Master of Indigenous Health program at the Dawadinna School of Public Health and leads many of the ceremonies and land-based teachings at the Hart House Farm. We were thrilled to learn that these relations and practices contributed to the establishment of a new managerial position of Indigenous and land-based learning at Hart House. And it is indeed exciting to see, for the first time at the U of T, a leadership position that is dedicated to Indigenous land-based teachings, research, and community partnerships. And I truly hope that the Hart House Farm can evolve to become a hub for Indigenous guardianships regionally and nationally. The last project is located at the new mouth of the Don River and former Portland's industrial area, which is managed by Waterfront Toronto and designed by the landscape architecture firm Michael van Valkenburg and Associates, who also designed King Circle. A number of Indigenous design teams were selected to create works, structures, and interpretive signage throughout the park, which was renamed by the Elders Advisor Circle Bidasige. Nikibii Dawadinna Giigwag partnered with our longtime mentors, Six Nations-based Turo architect and Métis-owned landscape architecture firm Trophic Design. Our proposal is to reclaim the traditional practices of trail marker trees or bent marker trees, a navigation system that was widely practiced across North America and was disrupted due to the impacts of colonization. Through our local research, we found marker trees in this region that may be as old as 200 to 400 years old. In this photo, a red oak pointing to the historical village of Diagon along the Humber River. However, to date, we have not been able to locate elders or knowledge providers who have direct knowledge of the bending practice. As such, the intent of this project is for the NDG youth to reclaim this knowledge with experimentation at the Bidasige Park for the next 5 years. In this photo are Jordy Boygoran and Keshig Mac Walsh, who bent a maple tree pointing in the direction of Giigwag, or Rouge River. Through a contract with the Waterfront Toronto, NDG Youth, with the support of elders and mentors, will bend a total of 25 trees throughout the park, 5 each year for the next 4 years. 5 trees were already bent by the youth this summer. Each of the trees carries a deep and layered story. Its relation to the immediate land, water, and habitat that surrounds it, and its relation to place names in the region that hold stories from time immemorial. The youth carved these stories and messages on wood support pieces, which will serve as reminders, calling community to gather and share these teachings. This project is indeed historic for its cultural reclamation and youth leadership. And as the trees mature and become visually prominent, they will form a unique identity for this park. But more importantly, the 25 sites are now part of a conversation with the treaty holders, Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and the City of Toronto Parks and Rec Division about a new agreement that will allow NDG youth and partnering community members to tend to these trees and exercise their inherent rights and responsibilities to the land. Hopefully, such an agreement serves as a precedent and helps to clear the path for other First Nations communities to do so. I will conclude my talk with the voices of the youth. So let's listen to Kaya Grant and Joseph Dusty Horn Cote present their research and design during our tree bending ceremony in August.
It's okay here. Yeah. Yeah. So it's because of the construction lines, if you guys can bring that down. Okay. Okay. Hi. Hello, my name is Kaya. This is my second year with Nikibii Dawadinna Giigwag.
Joseph, this is my first year at NDG.
So our tree, the balsam poplar, points northeast to the mouth of the Don River, or Wanscotinach, which is Anishinaabe-Moan, translating roughly to burning bright point.
The Don has become a symbol of both environmental neglect and resurgence.
And although there are multiple trees that would work well in this area of mixed forest and wetland thicket, the balsam poplar has phytoremediation properties, meaning it has the ability to neutralize pollutants in the soil and the water surrounding it, making it the perfect tree due to its capabilities and symbolism.
The heavily developed Don watershed has become the source of polluted runoff, which is what created the need for the Portland's project in the first place, making this tree a key reminder of the need for protected water.
So to start, our belt has many different meanings incorporated into it. To start, the green in the belt represents the tree itself, the balsam poplar. The white and the yellow in the belt represents the direction the tree is facing, which is northeast. Originally, we also had a feather and a bear paw in the north, or in the white and yellow sections, because on the medicine wheel, the white represents the north, which is also the bear, and the east represents the eagle, which is also the yellow section. Lastly, the blue on the belt represents the Don River. And originally, we also had Wanscotinach written on it, reminding us what the tree is pointing to and what it is standing for.
The wooden groin has the outline of the Don watershed as well as balsam poplar roots connecting to each other. This design allows for people to interpret their roots water in their own road. In the middle of the design, you will read the word Wanscotinach. It's the Anishinaabe name for the Don, meaning burning bright point. You will also see both I and I's name incorporated into the design. Thought it was important to add our names so that future generations can know we add our part in this historical moment. This design, everything is connected from the roots to the water to the words and even the leaves, symbolizing how important it is to remember that everything is connected and has two names.
Our tree is an inspiring, beautiful tree, perfect for this area, and our designs have incredible meaning and importance to Joseph and I, and we hope to inspire future generations. Thank you. It's okay.
So that concludes my talk. Thank you so much for your attention. Yeah.